everyone, welcome back to the Library of Parthos. My name is Sarah, and today we're going to be talking about the second book in the, actually I don't know what the trilogy is called, the Ferryman trilogy by Claire Mcfall, and that is the book Trespassers. Now, I did read the first book, one would hope, in the month of March, I want to say, so I do have a review for that book, which I will link here. Highly recommend. It was a really great book. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with the characters immediately. So as soon as I started it, I bought the second book, and the third one is currently on its way. So I will be starting that as soon as it arrives. I really can't wait. So of course I'll start with a spoiler-free summary though. If you are here and you've not read the first book, I highly recommend that you do that because the ending is going to get spoiled just talking about the second book. But if you've read the first one and you're interested in the second one, I'll start with a spoiler-free summary and then I'll get into spoilers and some of my thoughts. So starting spoiler-free, this is the story of Dylan. She's a 15-year-old teenager from Scotland. I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. In the first book, she was killed in a train accident and had to cross the wasteland to get to whatever comes after, like the afterlife. So she was given a guide or a ferryman named Tristan who was to help her get across the wasteland safely, avoiding the wraiths who would just like completely annihilate her and get her to the end. However, she ends up developing a relationship with him, and together they decide to try to go back to the land of the living together, and they are successful in doing that, and that is where the Ferryman ends. So Trespassers picks up almost immediately where the first book ends. Dylan and Tristan are now in the land of the living, I guess we'll say. They're in Scotland. Dylan is healing from her injuries, and they are together, which is what they wanted. However, there are some things that are not going quite well for them. Whenever they came through from the wasteland, there was a hole left between the land of the dead and the land of the living, I guess, and the wraiths are getting through, so it is up to Dylan and Tristan to stop them. So that's kind of it, spoiler-free. Now I'll go ahead and get into some of the spoilers for this story and also some of my thoughts on the book. First off, this book pacing-wise was quite a bit slower than the first book. I didn't enjoy it any less than the first book because of that. However, it was just a little bit slower. I think it made sense for the type of story that this was, though. We were just kind of seeing how Dylan and Tristan were dealing with the aftermath of coming back to the world of reality. Dylan being injured from the train crash, Tristan now for the first time being human. Both of them are living at Dylan's house with her mother, which I'm sure you can imagine that does not go very well. And they have these wraiths that are coming out that they have to deal with. Not nearly as much action as in the first book, and I would also argue that the stakes aren't really as high, but maybe you'll feel differently about that. So as I said, this book picks up almost immediately after Ferryman ends. So Dylan is in the hospital being treated for her injuries. Tristan is there as well, and so is her mother, Joan, and they almost immediately kind of start butting heads that she wants Tristan to stay and Joan doesn't want him to stay there. Already their relationship is quite rocky. Eventually Dylan is allowed to go home, and they decide that Tristan is going to stay with them. They're going to claim that he is her cousin, and he can then go to school with her and help her get around while she is in a wheelchair, because I believe both of her legs were fractured and she had some injuries on her back as well. Dylan and Tristan are kind of just trying to be normal teenagers who have both seen a lot more than they should have, you know. So Dylan and Tristan don't really feel like they fit in with everybody. While they are at school, I think it's at school. Yeah, it's at school. Tristan is called down to the office at one point, and the further away that he and Dylan get from each other, the more they feel like they're in pain. So both Dylan and Tristan find that if they are further away from each other, like mostly out of line of sight, then their injuries start to open back up. So Dylan's injuries from the train crash actually start to like her bones start to refracture, any wounds that she had reopen, and those exact same things happen for Tristan as well. So his legs, the bones in his legs feel like they're gonna snap. He starts bleeding from his back as well. So they discover very quickly that they cannot physically be apart from each other, or else they could end up, one of them could end up dying, or both of them. Dylan also finally gets to meet her dad, and that was the whole reason she got on the train in the first book, was to go meet her dad for the first time in like 10 years. And of course she never made it there, but now he has come to, I believe, Glasgow, and she gets to spend some time with him, and they get to rekindle their relationship, which is really cool. In the midst of all of that, Tristan and Dylan healing, trying to become normal teenagers, Dylan building this relationship with her dad, Tristan and Joan kind of butting heads, and Dylan kind of being stubborn in there as well. In the midst of all that, Tristan starts to notice that he gets like this bad feeling, and they discover that a wraith has come through into their world. So they learn about, I think it was 4 men who were killed right around the same area that the train crash was. And not only were they killed, they had like a hole punched through like their guts, which is very much how the wraiths work. Like in the wasteland, they just kind of go right through you, but not here. So Tristan's dealing with a lot of guilt for that, because that's very much their fault. This has never happened before, so it's quite obvious that it's their fault. And he ends up killing that wraith because they're more physical in this world, so he is able to kill them. In the midst of all of that, so I know I said the pacing was slow, but there's really a lot going on. It just takes a while to get there. An Inquisitor finds them, and an Inquisitor is, we don't really know what type of being the Inquisitor is. They are very much kind of about the balance between the wasteland, the afterlife, the world of the living. They are just kind of there to maintain balance and make sure everything is happening the way that it should. We don't really get to see their appearance. We just see like eyes. And initially the Inquisitor says that Tristan needs to go back to the wasteland and resume his job as a ferryman. And they both, of course, argue that that would then kill Dylan because they can't be separated. The Inquisitor says, you know, that's not really my problem. You're technically supposed to be dead anyway, so if you die, you die. However, they are both able to argue that the wasteland, the like veil between the wasteland and the world of the living, has a hole in it. They have seen the wraiths come through. They've killed one of the wraiths, and they think that they can close that rift. So the Inquisitor gives them 3 days to eliminate any wraiths that have crossed over and to also close that rift. And if they're able to do so, then potentially they'll be able to continue living out their lives as they had hoped. In this book, we are introduced to another ferryman. Her name is Susanna. And Susanna and Tristan were kind of like friends, but like kind of not friends. Their paths when they were escorting souls were like next to each other. So there were times where they would look out from their safe houses and just kind of be like, oh, hey, like we're both here at the same time. That's nice, you know. But as far as they know, they never actually had a conversation. But Susanna realizes that Tristan has left the wasteland. She doesn't know for sure. She just kind of realizes that she can't feel his presence anymore. She can't really see his little glowing orb going back and forth with souls. So she kind of figures out on her own that he found a way to get out of the wasteland, and in doing so he needed to take the soul he was escorting with him. Like that was the ticket. So Susanna has this dream that if she can use a soul to get out of the wasteland, she can find Tristan, they can live happily ever after like she has always wanted. And she really kind of starts daydreaming and like hyping herself up for this. So she does convince, it doesn't take much convincing. She does convince one of her souls that they can go back. He's like a 16-year-old kid. His name's Jack. He's real stubborn and like doesn't come from a great family, has been really involved with a lot of crime, and he ends up dying because he was stabbed in an alleyway. So anyway, she ends up convincing him that they can go back, he can resume his life, she'll help him get there, he'll help her get there, and then they can go their separate ways. Which, of course, isn't true. So once they get into the world of the living, they too realize that they cannot be separated, or Susanna starts to develop a knife wound similar to Jack's, and he ends up being in terrible pain. So Susanna says to Jack, let's find Tristan. I'm sure he can figure this out, and then you never have to see me again. We'll just get it taken care of. So Tristan realizes that Susanna is in the land of the living, because just like she could feel that he had left the wasteland, he can feel her presence now in the world of the living. And they do end up crossing paths right as Tristan is blowing up the rift between the worlds. So he and Dylan come up with this plan to just blow it up. That's the best option. So somehow they managed to buy a lot of like explosives of some kind, and he just kind of runs into the rift and stalls the little bomb that he made. And then Dylan and Susanna pull him back out, and the rift explodes, and they're able to like physically feel that it has closed. So that is kind of when Tristan and Susanna meet up. She kind of finds his location right as Dylan is trying to pull him back through the wasteland, and she's not really strong enough. Susanna chips in, and they're able to pull Tristan back. And unfortunately, he shares with them that no, they haven't figured out how to separate. It's just something that they're dealing with. But they also realize that Susanna and Jack, because when they came through, opened a separate rift, which wraiths are now getting through. So the four of them work together as a team to close that rift and kill all of the remaining wraiths. At this point, the Inquisitor comes back because it's been 3 days, and he says to Susanna and Jack, like, you are not able to stay here. You need to resume your job as a ferryman. And again, whatever happens to the soul happens. Like, he's not supposed to be alive anyway. Your bond was made out of deceitfulness and like selfish gain, so we're not gonna let this happen. Susanna is escorted back to the wasteland, and Jack just kind of decides like he's done with this, and he starts walking away, which means that they're separating, and then he does end up passing again. And the Inquisitor then says to Tristan and Dylan, like, your bond was much brighter. It was made out of love and affection. So for now, you can stay, but any other wraiths that should cross over are yours to deal with, or this is over. So at the very end of the book, Dylan and Tristan are finally like together. As far as we know, everything is fine. Dylan's parents are actually like starting to get back together potentially. And Susanna and Jack are back in the wasteland. One of the things that we learn in the first book is that the wasteland appears to the soul however they feel comfortable. So for Dylan, she was traveling through the Scottish Highlands, so that's how the wasteland appeared to her, because that's where she thought she was. For Jack, it was like the city where he was comfortable, where he called home. To the ferryman, the wasteland is like this really hot reddish sand. Like, there's this lake that is just like black, gross, slimy, sticky water. So when Susanna and Jack end up back in the wasteland, that is how it looks. In that version of the wasteland, the wraiths do not have to wait for cover of nightfall to move, or shadows. They can move freely. And so it's much more dangerous. And Susanna says it's basically a death sentence. That's essentially what they were given. So that's about it. As I said, this pacing was a little bit slower. I really enjoyed the book. You know, I was so comfortable with Dylan and Tristan in the first book. I really didn't want any new characters. But Susanna I really enjoyed her as a character, as she was trying to, you know, dreaming about what could be and trying to figure out all of this stuff. And I did like that the characters had consequences for their actions, because I feel like a lot of times in fantasy, it's like, oh, you happen to find the one way to get around this type thing. But no, they do have to face consequences, though. When I ordered the third book, I read a little blurb about the plot of the third one, and I'm so worried. I'm so scared for Dylan and Tristan. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens when the third book arrives. Third book is called Outcasts. It is the last one. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I will have a review for that posted. But that is it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.